Racist bank staff kicks disabled woman out. Then Shaq steps in. A wealthy private bank thought they could silence a disabled black woman, denying her the right to basic banking services. They humiliated her, dismissed her, and tried to erase the evidence. But what they didn't expect? Shaquille O'Neal witnessed it all. As he uncovers a hidden system of corruption and discrimination, the bank scrambles to cover its tracks. But it's too late. Now, the fight for justice is bigger than anyone imagined. Will the system finally be held accountable? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us, where are you watching from? Share in the comments below. The air inside Westbrook Private Bank was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of polished wood and expensive cologne. The lobby gleamed under the afternoon sunlight streaming through the massive glass windows, reflecting off the marble floors and gold-accented counters. Everything about this place exuded exclusivity, a financial sanctuary for the elite. At 6'11", Shaquille O'Neal was impossible to miss as he walked through the entrance. He moved with ease, his presence naturally commanding attention. Though he was one of the most recognizable figures in America, he didn't carry himself with arrogance, just a quiet confidence that made people admire him even more. A few staff members and customers noticed him immediately. Some offered polite nods, others whispered among themselves, but Shaq wasn't here to make a scene. He had an appointment with his financial advisor, and for him, this was just another routine errand. But for Camille Rhodes, the day was anything but routine. She entered the bank just behind Shaq, moving slowly, carefully, as if every step required thought. Her hands clutched the crutches tightly, her grip slightly unsteady. She wore a worn-out brown coat, its edges frayed with time, and a pair of faded jeans. Her posture was upright, dignified, but there was fatigue in her movements, the kind that came from years of hardship. She paused near the entrance, looking around, as if unsure whether she even belonged here. Behind the sleek glass counters, Nathan Carlisle, the bank's general manager, sat at his desk. Dressed in an immaculate gray suit, he exuded the kind of calculated charisma that came with power. Every detail of his appearance was curated, from the gold cufflinks on his sleeves to the perfectly styled hair that never seemed out of place. Beside him, Avery Holt, a teller in his early 30s, leaned lazily against the counter. He had the air of someone who believed himself untouchable, the kind of man who enjoyed small displays of power. His smirk was permanent, his tone always teetering between sarcastic and dismissive. As soon as Camille started making her way toward the counter, Nathan and Avery exchanged a knowing look. Nathan barely concealed his irritation, adjusting his cufflinks before getting up. He stepped forward smoothly, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Ma'am, I believe you're in the wrong place. This isn't a charity." A few customers turned their heads, sensing something wasn't right, but no one intervened. Camille, used to these kinds of encounters, didn't flinch. Her voice was calm but firm. "I need to access my disability benefits." Avery let out a quiet scoff, barely hiding his amusement. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, looking her up and down like she was wasting his time. "We have a different branch for people like you." Camille's fingers tightened around her crutches, but she kept her head high. Shaq, who had been casually flipping through his phone while waiting for his appointment, looked up, his attention now fully locked onto the scene unfolding in front of him. His relaxed posture straightened. His friendly smile disappeared. His eyes narrowed. Something in the air shifted. Avery, oblivious to the growing tension, continued, his tone laced with condescension. "This is a private institution, ma'am. We have policies." Shaq took a slow step forward. Nathan, noticing the movement, finally realized who had been standing there the whole time. His face paled slightly, but he quickly masked it with a forced professional smile. Shaq's voice, deep and measured, cut through the air like a blade. "She's a customer. Treat her like one." Silence fell over the room. Avery's smirk faltered for the first time. Nathan's fake confidence wavered. For the first time that afternoon, they had lost control of the situation. The tension in the bank thickened, an almost tangible shift in the air. Nathan Carlisle's smug expression hardened as he gestured toward security. Two uniformed guards, built like they had been hired more for intimidation than actual enforcement, stepped forward. Their movements were slow, deliberate, as if escorting out an actual threat rather than a disabled woman. Camille instinctively shrank back, gripping her crutches tighter. The humiliation in her eyes deepened, her shoulders pulling inward. She had been through this before. Shaq moved without hesitation, stepping between Camille and the approaching guards. He didn't push, didn't shove. He didn't have to. His sheer presence was enough to make them hesitate. "She's a customer. Treat her like one." His voice was calm, steady, but there was an unmistakable weight behind it. A weight that said there was no room for argument. Nathan's lips curled into an unimpressed sneer. He was used to power, used to making people feel small with a well-placed smirk or a dismissive tone. What he wasn't used to, what he had clearly never encountered, was a man like Shaq standing in his way. "Sir, we don't tolerate disruptions," Nathan said smoothly, adjusting his suit jacket, still holding on to the illusion of control. Shaq raised a brow, clearly amused at the man's arrogance. "You're about to tolerate a whole lot more." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. A ripple of whispers moved through the bank. Customers turned, some nudging one another, realizing exactly who was standing in front of them. A few people discreetly pulled out their phones, angling their cameras toward the growing confrontation. Nathan glanced around quickly, his confidence slipping just slightly. He wasn't used to being watched, to being questioned so openly. His entire career had been built on quiet, controlled discrimination, the kind that happened behind desks, through policies no one questioned, through conversations that never reached the public eye. Avery Holt, still perched behind the counter, hadn't quite caught on yet. He let out a mocking laugh, shaking his head. "People on government assistance accounts should use the automated teller." His voice was loud enough that the words hung in the air for a second too long. The weight of them was deafening. Shaq's jaw tightened, his eyes locked on Avery with an expression that could freeze fire. "Say that again?" Avery paused mid-smirk, realizing for the first time that he may have gone too far. Nathan, now seeing where this was headed, stepped in quickly, trying to regain control. "Now, let's not make a spectacle out of this. The bank has policies in place and we're simply enforcing them." Shaq tilted his head, his gaze unreadable. Policies that apply to everyone? Or just to certain kinds of people? Nathan's throat bobbed as he swallowed, his mind racing for a way out. He was good at talking, but this wasn't a situation he could talk his way out of. The bank had gone completely silent now. Even the customers who had previously been indifferent were glued to the unfolding moment. Camille, feeling the weight of all the eyes, started backing away, her voice hesitant. "Sir, I'll just go. This ain't worth the trouble." Shaq turned slightly, his expression softening for the first time. "No, ma'am. You're not leaving." Then he turned back, his face hardening as he looked at Nathan and Avery. "They are." Nathan let out a sharp, forced laugh, the sound cracking under pressure. "You think you can just walk in here and tell us how to run this institution?" Shaq didn't smile, didn't blink. "I don't think. I know." Avery shifted uncomfortably, his fingers drumming against the counter. The guards, now realizing they had stepped into something much bigger than a simple escort situation, glanced at one another, waiting for direction. Nathan was starting to sweat. "All right, sir. Let's be reasonable. If you'd like to file a complaint, I'd be happy to set up a meeting." Shaq let out a short, humorless chuckle. "Oh, we're way past a meeting." Nathan's eyes flicked toward the phones recording him, his panic growing. This wasn't behind closed doors anymore. This was public. This was dangerous. Shaq reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone and making a single call. "Lockhart, yeah, I'm at your bank. You're gonna want to see this." Nathan's face turned white. James Lockhart, regional director, a man Nathan had spent years trying to impress, was about to step into this mess. Shaq lowered his phone, looking Nathan dead in the eye. "Let's see how much longer you keep that job." Nathan's breath hitched. For the first time, he was the one who wanted to leave. Nathan Carlyle forced a tight-lipped smile, trying to regain control of the situation. His carefully constructed world was tilting, slipping away right in front of him. And the worst part? He knew everyone in the bank was watching. He straightened his suit, trying to mask his irritation behind feigned authority. "Look, sir," Nathan said, his voice dipping into a patronizing tone. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but we have policies in place for a reason. If you have a concern, you can take it up with customer service." Shaq tilted his head slightly, an amused smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. The sheer arrogance of this guy was almost entertaining. Without a word, he pulled out his phone and dialed. Avery Holt, still lounging behind the counter like this was some sort of show put on for his amusement, leaned toward Nathan, lowering his voice. "What's he doing?" Nathan rolled his eyes, exhaling sharply. "Calling his little social media followers. Let him." Shaq remained completely unfazed, his massive frame a wall of unshakable calm. He spoke into the phone low and deliberate, his voice carrying the weight of something inevitable. "Lockhart. Yeah, I'm at your bank. You need to fix this. Now." Nathan's smug demeanor froze. His phone buzzed against his hip. At first, he ignored it, but then it rang again. A different tone. A different caller. Nathan's stomach dropped. With slow mechanical movements, he pulled the phone from his pocket and looked at the screen. James Lockhart, Regional Director. The blood drained from his face. The entire room felt like it had shrunk, the walls closing in. Avery, still unaware of the shift in power, chuckled to himself. What, his little buddy calling in a favor? Shaq's smirk turned ice cold. Not a favor. A reckoning Nathan swallowed hard before reluctantly answering the call. "Mr. Lockhart, I don't care." Lockhart's voice cut through the line like a blade. "I don't care what you're about to say, Nathan. What the hell is going on over there?" Nathan glanced around frantically, his eyes darting to the phone cameras pointed at him, to Shaq's towering presence, to the growing unease in the lobby. "It's just a misunderstanding, sir. A small issue that—" "Shut it down, immediately." Nathan's breath hitched. Lockhart wasn't asking. He was ordering. Nathan tried to maintain his composure, but his fingers curled into a tight fist. He had spent years polishing his power in this bank, crafting a presence that commanded fear, respect, and compliance. And now, it was all crumbling in the span of a phone call. But then, before he could even attempt to salvage the moment, another problem emerged. From behind the counter, a young woman hesitated, glancing between Shaq and the bank staff. Sienna Brooks. She was in her mid-20s, a new hire who had already learned to keep her head down. She had seen what happened to employees who questioned Nathan's policies, Avery's smirks, the bank's unspoken rules. But today was different. Today she couldn't stay silent. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled a folded document from a stack of files, hesitating only for a moment before sliding it onto the counter, right in front of Shaq. Shaq glanced down, unfolding the paper carefully. His face, which had been filled with calm amusement just moments ago, changed instantly. The air shifted. His eyes, normally warm, darkened. His fingers tightened around the paper. Silence suffocated the room. Nathan, sensing something was wrong, stepped forward. "What is that?" Shaq didn't answer. His gaze remained fixed on the document, his mind processing the words in front of him. It was an internal memo, marked confidential, signed off by senior executives. A policy detailing how bank employees were to identify and discreetly discourage certain types of customers. A category labeled undesirable clientele. And underneath it, a list of targets. Low-income, high-risk accounts. Government-assisted clientele. Individuals who do not align with the bank's long-term investment demographic. Shaq exhaled sharply through his nose, his grip on the paper so tight the edges crumpled. Nathan, still oblivious, reached forward, trying to snatch it. "That's private bank policy." Shaq laughed, cold, dangerous. A sound that didn't match the warmth he was known for. He lifted his eyes, pinning Nathan to the floor with a glare so sharp it could cut through steel. Not anymore. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest. He finally understood. He wasn't up against just another disgruntled customer. He wasn't up against someone he could dismiss, intimidate, or threaten. He was up against Big Shaq, and he was about to lose everything. The tension in Westbrook Private Bank had reached a boiling point. Nathan Carlyle, once a cocky, untouchable manager, now stood near the counter, his carefully constructed power crumbling around him. Avery Holt, usually smug and relaxed, was visibly shaken. The leaked internal memo that Shaq held in his grip was a bomb waiting to go off, and everyone in the room knew it. Less than an hour after Shaq's phone call, the doors of the bank swung open, and in walked James Lockhart. He wasn't rushed. He never was. James Lockhart was the kind of man who let the world wait for him. Dressed in an expensive navy suit, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, Lockhart had the confidence of a corporate shark who had spent decades navigating scandals without getting his hands dirty. He adjusted his gold cufflinks as he walked toward the chaos unfolding in his bank. Nathan immediately straightened up, his nervous energy replaced with an eager, fake sense of control. "Mr. Lockhart, I'm so glad you're here." Shaq, standing firm, barely glanced at him. His focus was locked on Lockhart, watching the man's every move. Lockhart scanned the room, his cool gray eyes landing on Shaq, then Camille, then the memo in Shaq's hands. With a well-practiced, perfectly calculated expression of concern, he offered a rehearsed smile. "Mr. O'Neill," he said smoothly, "I believe this was all a misunderstanding." Shaq turned slowly, his massive frame towering over the bank manager. His expression remained unreadable. "Oh?" he said, tilting his head slightly. "Enlighten me." The bank had gone completely silent. Every customer, every employee, even the security guards, had stopped moving. They all knew this was about to be a conversation that would define the bank's future. Lockhart gave a small, calm chuckle, shaking his head as if Shaq was simply mistaken. "We pride ourselves on inclusivity at Westbrook Private Bank. If someone was made to feel unwelcome, I assure you it was not intentional." Nathan nodded enthusiastically, eager to grab onto Lockhart's lifeline. "Absolutely, sir. A miscommunication at best." Shaq, arms crossed, didn't blink. Camille, still seated in the corner, watched quietly. She had seen men like Lockhart before. Men who made you feel crazy for calling out what was right in front of you. But Shaq wasn't about to let them rewrite the story. Lockhart adjusted his suit jacket. "We will, of course, be looking into this situation immediately." Nathan, desperate to distance himself from the storm brewing, suddenly turned toward Sienna Brooks. "This employee may have misunderstood policy," he blurted out, voice tight. "She provided unauthorized documents to a customer." Sienna, who had been standing near the counter, stiffened. Her face drained of color. Shaq's head snapped toward Nathan, his eyes narrowing. "You're throwing her under the bus?" Nathan hesitated, but he was in too deep now. "We can't have rogue employees handing out internal documents." Sienna's fingers clenched at her sides. She wanted to speak, wanted to defend herself, but she had spent enough time in corporate banking to know how this worked. It was always easier to sacrifice the lowest-ranked person. Lockhart, ever the calculating businessman, watched the exchange carefully, waiting for his chance to step in and control the situation. But Shaq wasn't done. He took a step forward, looking directly at Lockhart. "So, what's the play here?" His voice was low, firm. "Sweep this under the rug, fire one employee, and act like this never happened?" Lockhart's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "We'd like to rectify this situation." Shaq exhaled sharply, nodding. "Good." Then folding his massive arms across his chest, he leaned in slightly. "Start by fixing what you broke." Lockhart's jaw tensed. This wasn't going to be as easy as he had hoped. The first news article dropped within hours. At first, it was just a local financial blog picking up the story, an anonymous tip, a leaked memo, and a former NBA legend standing up for justice. Then, the floodgates opened. By the next morning, the headlines had exploded across major media outlets. Exposed, high-end banks' hidden discrimination policy. Shaquille O'Neal takes a stand against corrupt banking system. Customers outraged, discriminatory banking practices uncovered. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Social media was on fire. Videos of the confrontation at the bank, Shaq stepping in, Nathan's arrogance, the leaked memo exposing their policies, were being shared thousands of times per minute.